It was a cold, quiet night. The wind whispered against the window, and the world outside seemed suspended in a breathless stillness. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling an invisible pull deep inside my chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was a call, a silent, powerful urging that I couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore either. I had always felt different, even as a child. While other kids ran freely under the sun, laughing and playing, I often found myself sitting alone, lost in thought. There was a sense that I didn't quite belong. A silent knowing lingered, whispering that I was made for something more, something unseen and extraordinary. That night, under the hush of the sleeping world, the feeling grew stronger. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from fear, but from recognition. It was as if something ancient had awakened inside me, a tiny spark igniting in the vast darkness. I closed my eyes and listened, breathing in the silence, waiting. A question surfaced in my mind, one that had followed me for as long as I could remember. Why do I feel like I was born for something greater? It wasn't a boastful thought. It was a quiet, aching truth, stitched into the very fabric of my being. I wasn't looking for fame or fortune. I was looking for purpose. The wind howled a little louder, as if answering my silent plea. I opened my eyes and sat up. My room felt different, now thicker somehow, charged with an invisible electricity. The call inside me pulsed stronger, urging me to awaken, to remember who I truly was. Not exactly what it was yet, but I knew it was real. And for the first time in my life, I embraced the mystery instead of fearing it. I whispered to the darkness, "I'm ready." The days following that night felt strange, almost surreal. Colors seemed sharper, sounds clearer, and emotions deeper. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I started noticing things others missed, a sudden shift in a friend's mood, a hidden sadness behind a stranger's smile. My senses were no longer ordinary. Crowded places overwhelmed me. Malls, parties, even busy streets felt suffocating. It wasn't the noise, it was the energy. I could feel the invisible storms inside people, their anger, their fears, their hidden despair, and I had no shield. Every emotion poured into me like rain soaking an unguarded soul. I began sensing falsehoods in conversations. Words sounded polished and polite, but the energy behind them screamed deception. A simple handshake could reveal a person's true intentions. Smiles that once seemed warm now felt hollow. I was no longer naive to the masks people wore. There were moments when my intuition became undeniable. I would think about a person, and they would call within minutes. I would dream about an event, only to see it unfold days later. At first, it startled me. Then it became a quiet certainty, a knowing that ran deeper than thought. Yet, even as these gifts blossomed, so did my loneliness. I wanted to fit in, to be part of the laughter and the easy conversations. But no matter how hard I tried, I felt like an outsider, watching life unfold through a glass wall. I longed for connection, but authenticity was rare. Sometimes I would force a smile, laugh when expected, and nod along to conversations I barely understood. But inside, a deep ache grew. It wasn't arrogance. It was the painful awareness that I wasn't meant to lose myself in shallow waters. I was called to swim in deeper seas. Late at night, when the world was quiet again, I would sit by my window and stare into the darkness. There, in the hush of the sleeping city, I allowed myself to feel everything. The confusion, the sadness, the hope. I knew my journey had only just begun. It happened on a lazy Sunday afternoon. I sat with a group of friends at our usual cafe, the sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The conversation drifted towards strange dreams and odd feelings. My heart raced. Maybe I thought it was finally time to speak, to share the visions and dreams that had been haunting me. I cleared my throat and spoke, describing the dreams that felt more real than waking life, the moments when I just knew something was about to happen. As the words left my mouth, I felt lighter, almost hopeful. Maybe they would understand. Maybe they would see the world the way I did. At first, there was silence. Then, a few nervous chuckles. One friend made a joke about me becoming a psychic. Another laughed louder, clapping me on the back. "Man, you've been watching too many movies," he said. The rest of them laughed along. The hope I had felt collapsed into a pit in my stomach. I forced a smile and laughed with them, but inside, something shifted. I realized then that my experiences were not for everyone. They were sacred, tender things, too delicate to be tossed around in casual conversation. Not everyone would understand, and that was okay. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed every word I had said. Shame and regret washed over me. But deeper still was a lesson, a whisper in my spirit reminding me that silence can be sacred. Some truths are meant to be protected, nurtured quietly in the heart until the right time. From that moment on, I made a vow. I would no longer share my sacred experiences carelessly. I would listen for the still small voice within me. Only when truly guided, when the moment felt right, would I speak. Until then, my journey would remain mine alone, guarded in silence and reverence. It started subtly at first. I noticed how strangers reacted to me in ways I couldn't explain. Some would smile warmly, their eyes lighting up as if they had found something they didn't even know they were seeking. Others would glance at me with unease, shifting away as if my very presence made them uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. People could feel something, an energy, a presence that spoke before I even said a word. It wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet recognition of something different. I began to understand that my energy was not something casual. It was sacred. Like a fire, it had the power to warm and illuminate, but also to overwhelm if not protected properly. I had to learn how to tend it, how to shield it without snuffing it out. There were days when I felt completely drained after being around certain people. Their complaints, negativity, or sheer chaos would sap my spirit like a leech. It wasn't just emotional, it was energetic. I had to accept that guarding my energy was not selfish. It was necessary. I began setting boundaries. I chose carefully who I spent time with, who I allowed into my inner space. Some friendships faded, others grew stronger. It hurt at first, but with every step, I felt lighter, freer, more aligned with the person I was becoming. One evening, I walked into a crowded room, a friend's birthday party. The moment I entered, the energy shifted. Conversations slowed and heads turned. I wasn't doing anything special. I wasn't even trying. It was simply the presence I carried now, refined and intentional. It was then I truly understood. Presence is power. It's not about demanding attention. It's about being so aligned with your spirit that the world feels it without you saying a word. And with that understanding came great responsibility to protect, to nurture, and to honor the energy entrusted to me. There was a time I thought I had found someone who truly understood me. They listened with bright eyes and nodded at all the right moments. For the first time in a long time, I let my guard down. I shared the depths of my soul, the visions, the insights, the dreams that I usually kept hidden away like precious treasures. But trust, once given too easily, can become a weapon. Not long after our conversation, I heard whispers. My deepest truths, twisted and tossed around like gossip in the wind. They laughed about me behind my back, mocking what I had offered so vulnerably. It felt like a spiritual stoning. Every word thrown against me struck deeper than any physical blow could. I questioned myself, doubted my path. Was I foolish to believe someone could understand? Had I mistaken loneliness for trust? The betrayal cut deep. I withdrew from the world, building walls around my heart thicker than ever before. I stopped attending gatherings. I stopped reaching out. Even simple conversations felt risky, like walking barefoot through a minefield. A quiet depression settled over me. Days blurred into nights. I lost the spark that once burned so brightly within. Everything felt heavy: my body, my mind, my soul. I would stare at the ceiling for hours, questioning the purpose of it all. There were moments I wondered if the journey was worth it. Was this loneliness the price of carrying a light that others couldn't understand? Every betrayal, every wound, left a scar that glowed faintly under the surface, reminders of battles fought in silence. But even in the darkness, a tiny ember remained. A part of me refused to let the betrayal define me. I realized that the problem was never sharing. It was sharing with the wrong souls. Some truths are too sacred for unprepared hearts. After the sting of betrayal faded into a distant ache, I realized that silence was not weakness. It was strength. It was wisdom. I began to see that every time I reacted, every time I defended myself, I handed over a piece of my power. Silence, I learned, preserved my soul. One afternoon, I found myself facing a verbal attack. A group of former acquaintances, still bitter from the truths I had once shared, hurled accusations and mockery. Their voices were sharp, slicing through the quiet cafe like knives. All eyes turned toward me, waiting for a response. But I said nothing. I met their gaze with calm, unshaken silence. I felt the anger bubble inside me, the urge to defend my name, my truth. Yet, I breathed deeply and stayed still. Their words lost power the moment I refused to feed them. As the moments passed, their laughter faded. The room, once buzzing with judgment, grew awkwardly quiet. I realized then, silence disarmed them. It exposed their cruelty without me needing to lift a single word in defense. In that moment, I reclaimed my power. From that day forward, I understood that not every battle needs to be fought with words. Some victories are earned in stillness, in knowing who you are so deeply that no external noise can shake you. True power, I learned, is silent and steady. I also learned the value of discretion. Moving in silence became my new strength. No longer did I announce my dreams, my goals, or my victories. I let my work speak. I let my spirit shine quietly, without seeking applause or validation. Success, I realized, is most powerful when it is quiet. There's no need to broadcast every step. Those who are meant to see it will. Those who aren't don't matter. Silence protects dreams, the way a cocoon protects a butterfly in transformation. In the quiet moments after the storm, I faced the greatest enemy of all, myself. Anger would flare up, hot and fast, burning bridges before I even realized it. Despair would creep in during the lonely nights, whispering that maybe this journey wasn't worth it. Frustration gnawed at me, a constant companion. I realized that if I didn't learn to master my emotions, they would master me. So, I started small. Each morning, I sat quietly, breathing in the silence before the day began. Meditation became my anchor, my daily ritual of grounding myself in something deeper than passing storms. Some days, the chaos inside was too loud to silence. That's when I turned to journaling. I poured every angry thought, every desperate plea, every broken dream onto paper. Writing didn't erase the pain, but it gave it a voice, a place to live outside my mind. Slowly, I began to notice the patterns. Anger often hid fear. Despair often masked exhaustion. By giving space to my emotions, rather than fighting them, I started to understand them. And understanding, I realized, was the first step to mastering them. Balancing action and stillness became the next lesson. I used to believe I had to be constantly doing helping, fixing, proving. But the truth was, there was power in stillness too. I learned to act when guided and rest when needed, without guilt. Serving others and protecting myself became a delicate dance. I couldn't pour from an empty cup. I had to set boundaries, not walls, but healthy spaces where my spirit could breathe and grow. Protecting my peace wasn't selfish. It was sacred. Each day, I chose balance. I wasn't perfect. Some days, emotions won. Some days, the world overwhelmed me. But more and more, I remembered who I was. A soul on a divine journey. Learning, falling, rising again, stronger and wiser each time. The attack didn't come with swords or fists. It came silently, invisibly, through toxic words, jealous glances, and draining conversations. I found myself surrounded by people who smiled to my face, but carried knives behind their backs. Their energy clung to me, heavy and cold. At first, I didn't recognize it. I blamed myself for feeling exhausted, anxious, doubting my worth. I thought maybe I was too sensitive, too weak. But deep down, my spirit knew. I wasn't weak. I was under spiritual attack. I began to withdraw. Conversations drained me. Crowded rooms felt suffocating. Even loved ones who meant well left me feeling depleted. I knew I had to act. If I didn't cleanse my spirit, I would lose the very light that made me who I was. I started with prayer. Not rushed or ritualistic prayers, but deep, raw conversations with the divine. I cried out for protection, for cleansing, for clarity. And slowly, I felt the weight begin to lift, like chains breaking one by one. Next, I cleansed my space. I burned sage, letting the smoke fill every corner, pushing out the unseen heaviness. I opened windows wide, letting in fresh air and sunlight. I played music that lifted my soul and filled my home with peace. I learned to shield my spirit daily. Before stepping into the world, I imagined myself wrapped in a cloak of light, untouchable by darkness. I spoke affirmations. I am protected. I am grounded. I am guided. Words have power, and I use them like armor. Slowly, my strength returned. I could walk into a room without feeling drained. I could engage with the world without losing myself. I realized that spiritual attacks would come, but I was no longer defenseless. I was armored in light and rooted in faith. The battle for my spirit wasn't over. It never would be. But I had learned the weapons of prayer, cleansing, and light. And I had learned the most important truth of all. Darkness cannot extinguish a soul that knows its own light. In the quiet aftermath of the battles I fought, I realized something profound. My strength didn't come from my own hands. It came from a source far greater than myself. I had been trying to fight alone, and that's why I stumbled so often. I began each morning with prayer, not as a duty, but as a conversation. Some days, it was a whisper. Other days, it was a flood of emotion. But every time, I felt the presence of something ancient and loving, wrapping itself around me. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was subtle, a guiding nudge, a sudden clarity, a feeling that I wasn't walking alone. Every time fear crept in, I felt a whisper, "You are protected. Keep going." Every step was a conversation between my soul and the divine. I realized faith wasn't about never doubting. It was about continuing to walk even when the path was unclear. Faith meant standing tall, even when storms raged, trusting that the storm would pass and the sun would rise again. Some days, I still felt weak. Some nights, I still cried out in frustration. but those moments no longer crushed me. They reminded me that I wasn't expected to be perfect, only to stay connected to the one who is. Each day became sacred. Each breath a prayer. Each moment a chance to listen for that still, small voice inside me. The world outside remained chaotic, but inside, I found peace that nothing could shake. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. From the first whisper that called me on this path, to the silent hand that lifted me every time I fell, I was always guided, always protected. My heart knew it now, deep and unshakable. And so, I walk forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. I walk with the light inside me burning brighter than ever, and the steady knowledge that no matter what storms come, I am anchored in something eternal. I am never alone. The wind whispered around me as I stood atop the mountain. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted in gold and crimson. Below, the world looked still, as if the earth itself had paused to witness this moment. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the crisp air brush against my skin, and listened to the silence within. When I opened my eyes, I saw it, the light, not just around me, but pouring out from within. It spread across the landscape, touching hills, rivers, and valleys, waking them up with its tender glow. I realized then that I was not merely a part of the world. I was a bearer of light. Every hardship, every tear, every sleepless night had led to this. It was never about being above others. It was about carrying hope, carrying truth, carrying a piece of the divine. And now, I was ready. If you are reading these words, know this. You too are chosen. You, who have felt different all your life. You, who have sensed an invisible calling pulling at your soul. You, who have endured storms that others couldn't see. You are not alone. You have never been. Even when the nights felt endless, even when the world seemed deaf to your cries, you were being guided. Your scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof of your journey. Stand tall. Let your light shine fearlessly. Speak when love compels you. Act when truth calls you. And most of all, trust that quiet voice inside. It has always known the way. Though our paths may differ, our light unites us. Every soul that rises lifts another. Every light that shines guides another through the darkness. Together we form a constellation that no night can extinguish. Keep walking. Keep believing. Keep loving. Even when it's hard. Even when it feels like you're alone. You are never truly alone. Forces greater than yourself are walking this path with you, cheering you on. I'll see you on the path, fellow traveler. Until then, shine brightly. Believe fiercely. And never, ever forget, you were made for more than you can imagine.